Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kersner.
Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kersner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me for this amazing present moment. The title and topic for today's podcast is Guiding with Presence. And I am joined by guest host Chris Anderson. Chris is a multi-day guide manager who works over at the Arizona Outback Adventures. And I invited Chris over to the podcast because I felt that it was time for me to talk a little bit about how guidance, whether I'm helping to guide you to the present moment or we have other people in our lives that are helping guide us, is such an integral component of learning to be present and maintaining presence. Because presence can be a solo job at times, but there's always a component that we want to work with other people so that they can act as basically presence partners. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I want to give you this opportunity to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and where you do it and what's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Like you said, I'm a guide manager at Arizona Outback Adventures, and my entire working career has been in the outdoor guiding industry. And in short, what we do is we take people out for anywhere between a half day and 5 to 10 days and really get them to experience some part of nature that they most likely wouldn't otherwise do without some sort of assistance or guidance. I've worked in about every aspect of that industry, driving Jeeps and Hummers to climbing to hiking to cycling. And like you said, I've been with the current company, Arizona Outback Adventures, and that's exactly what we do. Primarily the hiking and cycling side of things, but really our whole focus is getting people to the outdoors and getting them focused on something other than their day-to-day life. Most people come from a background where they're not very nature or active oriented on their own, but they want to get an experience like that, and they need someone to do it with them. And that really kind of gets to the heart of how I started in this industry and why I've been in this industry my whole life. Is I really enjoy the opportunity to take people outside of their norm, outside of their comfort zone, and really kind of get them to transition into a different mindset, a different speed, a different gear, and kind of see that awakening in them when they're out there.
So I'd imagine that with some of the people that you work with, when you first get them out there, it's a little bit of a transition or a little abrupt if they're so used to being tied to their smartphones and seated at an office desk staring at computer monitors 40, 50 hours a week. How do you kind of help them shift away from that state of being into one that's more aligned with their surroundings and nature?
Sure. Well, one of the main things is, one of the biggest things we provide the safety. So we take away a lot of the worry behind that being uncomfortable, that new situation, and we really point them in a direction that can help them focus on something that maybe they're not used to. So if they still have their head a little bit wrapped up in what's going on at work or what's going on in life or the city, that's why we're there to interpret nature, really get them excited about what they're seeing, work them through the uncomfortable part maybe of a strenuous hike or a strenuous ride, and really kind of direct them into, you're almost teaching someone from the start how to accept the environment, and it's teaching them how things are happening at a slower pace and how really being present is your best gift out there, because you waste a lot of time and energy worrying too much about things you don't have control of. And I think nature does a really great job of teaching you that you can wish and worry all you like, but whatever's happening now is what's happening, and you can choose to deal with it how you will. And that's really where the focus goes, is I think guiding people through the ability to change their mindset how they like, regardless of how the external factors might be making them feel at the moment.
You mentioned two things. One of the things I want to hone in on right now is being uncomfortable. I find that being uncomfortable and being challenged it really is a reflection point for us. Because in that moment, when we're being challenged or when we're uncomfortable, we get to kind of see how we're feeling and what we're experiencing in that moment. We have an option to shift into that moment, or we have another option to bring past experiences into that moment, whether that's fear, concern. We can shoot ourselves into the future with worry. And one of the things that I've noticed when I work with patients and when I'm coaching and when I'm guiding is that it takes a gentle hand to allow someone to awaken to their true nature, first and foremost, for them to have the reflection of how they're reacting in that moment so that they can understand that, that some of their behaviors are not necessarily helping them. But, I think it's interesting where you have the component of nature right there with you. So as you can awaken these people to their true nature, which is presence, you have nature right there helping them reflect back right into themselves, almost like a mirror. So there's not that smartphone or that TV or whatever it is, those distractions. Nature is the focus. And I'd imagine that watching people kind of like snap back into their true nature, it's got to be a very rewarding experience for you.
It's huge. It's very moving. And honestly, a lot of people get into our industry because they think they're interested in the playing in the outdoors, quote unquote, but really you stay in it for longer than a year or two because you love seeing those kind of transformations in people. And that's absolutely right. I think the biggest crutch that we sort of fall on in modern day life is distraction. And if we're uncomfortable in a situation, often we have 100 ways to distract ourselves from it. And that sort of is our go-to. But, when you're crawling out of the Grand Canyon, and especially the Grand Canyon has a strong effect on people because there is there's a finality to the top where that unlike climbing a mountain where if you're getting a little too tired, you can sort of turn around and stumble down the mountain. Here, your hardest step is your very, very last step to the top, and you can't ignore that. And when people start to get physically uncomfortable, what really happens is they ramp up with much more mental discomfort. And a lot of what we do is guide them through the fact that mental discomfort is more of a challenge for them than the physical. And they have a lot more physical left. And that part of this process is identifying it, accepting it, and moving through it. And then when you can be in the present, you can identify it, but still enjoy kind of what's going on around you and stopping to look at the view, even though you may be exhausted, really focusing on the little things that you can have an effect on and that can affect your outlook in a positive way instead of trying to distract yourself or trying to worry too much about what may or may not happen in the coming miles. You just have to be there and do it. And most people are really surprised by first how far they can go when they thought maybe they were done, or they've never really had to spend time with their feelings too much. And so I think both the combination of nature sort of giving them no choice, but then also that discomfort is really something that we strive in our modern society to get away from, but I think it's a huge teacher.
So again, there's a few things that you just talked about that I think are really important to just focus on. Identify, accept, and move forward. That is the way. Okay, identifying is more of an awakening to seeing what really is, how you're feeling, what's going on in front of your face. Acceptance, and I talk about this a lot, is an action that we all need to take, because when you're in the situation, anything less than acceptance creates an incredible amount of suffering. And then, of course, the movement. We have to move forward. It's when we start giving ourselves options to not move forward, to run away, to move in the opposite direction. That just detracts from our ability to kind of seamlessly move through this world. And it's probably exemplified in when people are on these kind of hikes where there is no real exit strategy. You cannot turn around and run away. Like, you have to move forward. And that, again, I talk about reflection points. That is an ultimate reflection point. When you have no exit strategy, you are in it. It is, and you have to accept what is, and you have to move forward. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that acceptance point runs the gamut for people. Some people do it naturally. Some people break down. When they're physically a mile from the top, but feel like they can't take another step. The reality is they can, and as guides, it's our job to make sure that they're actually not physically in harm's way or in danger. We keep them hydrated and plenty of food on us, and we have the ability to take weight from their pack and make sure, but we're not carrying them out, and they know that there's no other option by that point. And sometimes there's a bit of a breakdown and some tears and some frustration, but eventually the great thing that nature provides is no other option. And sometimes if you haven't had to go through much of that in your life, it's really amazing to see, because what that does is when they do make that conscious decision to accept, move forward, they do make it out. And then that often will reframe a lot of their life, because other challenges they run into in life where maybe before they would distract themselves, run from them. They have this as a reminder that sometimes acceptance and the metaphorical one foot in front of the other will get you through things that you previously thought impossible.
Being uncomfortable is a quintessential factor for human success. We have built a society that is full of creature comforts. And the minute that something adverse comes in our way, because we're so used to being comfortable, it can distract. It definitely frustrates and it angers some people because it feels so adverse. But without those challenges, real true growth is just not possible. And I have to imagine that watching people break through in the way that you're seeing, that's amazing. That's priceless. I have a similar role as a guide when I'm working with patients, to show them, to see them at certain breaking points, to walk them through it, to reframe, and at times to just be like a mirror almost. But at the end of the day, it's true that the body and the mind and the spirit can persevere. It's just a matter of a perception. It's the way that we see things, because that last mile can look like 1,000 miles if we see it like that. But if we can reframe it and look at it as one step in front of the other, one presence moment in front of one presence moment, that's when things get a lot easier, because we're not shooting ourselves into a place that doesn't exist, into a future that hasn't happened yet. We're not taking fears from a past that happened and that are skewed in our mind. And people need these experiences.
Absolutely.
These are important experiences.
Sure. And the more your mind has an effect on it, when you look at that situation, that one step forward doesn't hurt as much as they think. What they're thinking of is, what if it hurts more around the next corner? What if I get worse? What if I feel worse? And there's all these what ifs. Or like you said, I remember as a kid going on this horrible hike, and that turned out poorly. So what if that happens? And I think we waste a lot of energy and life momentum wishing or worrying about things that aren't at this moment. And certainly a lot of those end up being things out of our control. And one of the great things about being a guide is what often goes towards people's ability to distract themselves is either rightfully or slightly off base, being able to make up an excuse for why they shouldn't do something. And one of the great jobs we have is to remove a lot of those reasons why they're a little bit hesitant to do something. And even though they may be exhausted hiking out of the canyon or a little bit terrified to jump off that 5-foot waterfall into the water, you as the guide are removing a lot of their logical reasons for not doing it. and telling them that you're going to be there to keep them safe. You're going to be there they can do this. You believe in them. You've seen other people in their situation do it. And you start to remove some of those barriers to them stepping outside their comfort zone. And that allows them the freedom to do it and then transform because of it.
It's interesting to talk about logic because it's not necessarily pure logic.
Sure.
It's a logic based on emotion and fear.
Sure.
So yes, it makes sense to them in that moment. Does it make sense in general outside of that experience? No.
Correct.
And that's part of being a guide, is that helping people reframe the logic that they've created for themselves that has created the barrier, and helping them dismantle that so that they can see the ultimate truth in the situation.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then when they go through it and realize that your version of logic was a more one that they can reframe with and re-identify with, they're new people. And at any age, I mean, we see it. We take kids on adventures at certain ages, and we see that oftentimes some of the kids have been framed into a life where the only way to stay entertained is with some electronic device. But after a little while, they all revert back. And in the same way, you get adults of all ages who just haven't had to suffer or be uncomfortable much in their life. And in some ways, that's a blessing, of course. But in some ways, when they do, they haven't had to look in that mirror like you talked about. And they haven't really had to come face to face with some true feelings or true emotions. And so helping guide them through that is amazing. And one thing that comes up often is people often get upset out on a trip if the weather is just not perfect. And certainly as a guide in this industry, you've learned long ago that if you're waiting for the absolute perfect day, you'll be waiting for your whole life. But I really enjoy talking to people about separating comfort from happiness and realizing that if it's a little cold, a little wet, a little dry, a little hot, you can still be fully happy in the moment and happy that what is happening is just fine and accepting of it. And again, accepting and moving forward rather than getting upset about something you can't change is also an ability that becomes transformative to somebody, and realizing that is separate and that their vacation doesn't have to be ruined because the weather is doing this or that or whatever they were hoping it wasn't. And the funny thing from the outside is that more often than not, it's people are a little upset when it's a little cool and rainy out in the Southwest. But in reality, when we have just perfect bluebird days, most people really struggle with the heat and the sun. And so you want to tell them, look, you're actually going to function better in this slightly rainier, happier environment. But they, of course, don't realize that. That's not what they came for.
Well, there, two things right there, perfection and expectations. I mean, I'm not saying that it's wrong for either to seek either of those, because a lot of us do. But perfection is an impossible thing to chase after. And as you were saying, that perfection, especially when we're idealizing nature, so that those blue skies and sunny days, at the end of the day, you've seen it, and it causes more problems than not. But allowing people to become reframed, to explain to them why that inclement weather actually benefits them more, helps to break down those preconceived notions of what should be.
Absolutely.
And it's expectations also lead to a lot of suffering, because reality rarely meets expectations. And when we hold on to expectations instead of just having intentions, then we're always being disappointed.
Sure.
When it comes to nature is perfect. It just is, because when you accept nature, you understand that whether it's rainy, whether it's sunny, whatever it is, that's exactly the way it was supposed to be. And when you inject your own feeling space into something like nature, you're always going to create suffering for yourself.
Yeah.
And I like to talk about these things because it really helps people understand that perception is reality and reality is perception. So if you can perceive that weather that's slightly inclement, maybe a little rainy, maybe a little cool, and accept it for what it is, and understand that it's perfect, it's beautiful. It might even change, because a lot of times in the valley, as you know, in the morning it's a little cool and then it warms up. shoot up to 70, 80 degrees. I mean, we're getting right back there now. So, it's a matter of how you see the world and a matter of how you're going to accept it, and then a matter of how you're going to move forward. But you're seeing it every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a beautiful thing.
And I think they're all versions of we get really uncomfortable when we feel like we're not in control. And that shows itself in many ways. And I think the weather is one part of that, where all of a sudden you're at the mercy of the desert or the mountains, and people get scared by not being able to control their environment there and having to feel like they're reacting to it as opposed to fixing it. It happens a lot when people who are, in their circles, they are a very highly operating business person, or they're a CEO of a company, or they really have mastered their bubble. And now that they're in mine, they feel very out of control. And that panics some people. And especially if you're a very alpha type personality and you're used to knowing everything before it happens and calling the shots, anything that is causing you to become reactionary in your history has meant that you're on your heels and you're not in a good place. And so all of that is very, it's a very good teacher for people, because they use the outdoors for at-risk youth and youth who have been in trouble with gangs or with drugs, or they use it because it presents an unchanging force, and you have to realize that it's you that is the only thing that is going to change going into this, not it. And that becomes, I think, powerful, because we have the ability in our modern day lives to affect almost anything. And I think that's what people get really comfortable with. So if this isn't good, I can change it. If it's too hot in the car, I can turn up the air conditioning. If this isn't good enough, I can buy a better one. We have that ability. And when you get out into nature, that's it. All you can change is your mindset. You can't change anything about it. And, with the at-risk youth, those programs will often, the point is to make kids as uncomfortable as possible so that they realize that that is not changing, but their mindset can always change. They may be thinking that drugs are the only choice, or that they have to be in a gang because that's what you do on this block or that block. And in reality, nature teaches them that what's in their mind and what's in their heart is what, if they listen to it, can really direct them, because that's the only true thing that they have control of.
Beautifully said. Yeah, 100%. And I was just thinking about how, you're making people vulnerable more than anything. And that is one thing that so many people are afraid of, is being vulnerable. And it's so important, because in the vulnerability and in the exposure, that's where our truth comes out. That's when we get to really dig deep and see who we are, and how we feel. Especially, and I've seen this when I work with patients and people that are titans of industry, and even doctors or whomever that really are in control of their environment, that have made large sums of money, whatever it is. When you start showing them a different reality or a different perspective or a different perception, it kind of cracks them open. And there's definitely a fear space that exists because it's out of their control. And nature, going out into nature, that's beautiful, because no one can control nature. It's the one ultimate variable that is uncontrollable. Maybe one day science might be, I don't know. But at this point in time, there's no control over it. So I think it's beautiful that when you're taking these people out, you can't make them any guarantees as to what kind of experience they're going to have, as to what kind of weather they're going to have, as to how they're going to feel or what they're going to think. Except that they will have the opportunity to really experience presence.
Well, and one of the great things is they will often go into a trip, of course, not expecting that. They're going to give you the classic answers of, I'm going for beauty, and I'm going to get away from the emails and the rat race. But if you talk to a lot of those people after a trip, they'll say that some of their favorite moments of the trip also coincide with some of the more uncomfortable moments. And they may not realize that that's the connection, but if it's something we help them through, a scramble down a piece of rock, or a jump off a small waterfall and have a supai, or a really challenging, climb that day on the bike, they'll often state that day or that section of that day as being one of their favorites, and they may not know why, but it really is that transformative moment where they were really forced to do nothing but look inside. And some people, I think, are aware that that's happening, but honestly, more than or most of them, I would say, don't necessarily realize that that's the reason. But really, spending some time looking in that mirror and moving through it and getting to know themselves was more important than the view from the top or the splash at the bottom.
Exactly. And what more is it to life than getting to know ourselves? When we're so hyper-focused on everything outside of ourselves. And being present, that's the only time that you have the opportunity to actually do that. And having experiences like you're describing that your company offers is so important. It's such an important offering, especially out in Arizona where we have beautiful nature.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a shame when we're stuck inside all the time and we're not experiencing what this beautiful state has to offer all of us. So Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming down. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think a lot of people are going to take a lot away from it. I want to give you an opportunity right now to maybe mention your company's website, how people can get a hold of you if people are interested in having some of these experiences. Yeah,
absolutely. So our company is Arizona Outback Adventures. The website is AOA-adventures with an S at the end.com. And we do everything from local tours here in town for a half day if you want to just go see some of the local mountains, hiking, cycling, mountain biking. We do some rafting and kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding on the Salt River. Beautiful, beautiful area to see some wild horses and eagles, and it's a lot more lush than you would think. And then we also run trips all over the Southwest for multiple days at a time, and that's kind of where I fall in. You can do hiking in Yosemite, you can go cycling in Death Valley, you can go all kinds of different trips at all kinds of different levels. Whatever level is right for you is going to be the one that just gets you out of that comfort zone. So,
mm-hmm. Perfect. Chris, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to welcome everyone back to the present moment.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.